Welcome once again to the Brownstone, Wolfe's sanctuary of logic, orchids, and murder. Do tell us where in the world you're listening from, and don't hesitate to share your thoughts. If you enjoy these cases, consider liking and subscribing. Now then, shall we begin? Nero Wolfe and the telegram that reopened old wounds. It was 12 minutes past midnight, which in Wolfe's brownstone was an hour when silence ought to be left alone to earn its keep. The city outside wasn't sleeping, Manhattan never does, but in that house on West 35th Street there were only two sanctioned noises at that hour: the hum of the furnace in the basement and the faint snore of Nero Wolfe upstairs, carrying through the ceiling like a bassoon with indigestion. I was at his desk, glass of milk in one hand and a stack of his afternoon dictation in the other. Wolfe had retired at 11, grumbling about the imperfections of Fritz's baked trout, perfection being the only standard Wolfe ever conceded existed in food. That left me, Archie Goodwin, with the enviable task of deciding whether to clean up his prose or clean out the icebox. Either chore promised as much excitement as a lecture on the mating habits of moths. I just tipped the milk for another swallow when the telephone split the quiet. Phones after midnight don't announce good tidings. Never have, never will. They're either corpses calling collect, crooks trying to rent alibis, or Inspector Kramer shaving another year off his life by yelling into the receiver. I scooped it up before it could rattle Wolfe awake. West 35th Street, I said. Archie Goodwin presiding. The voice that came over was female, breathless and quivering like a clarinet reed. A practiced ear can tell the difference between real fright and the kind that comes in a silver dish with cocktail olives. This one was the genuine article, with a tremor sharp enough to nick glass. Please, I must see Mr. Wolfe, she said. It cannot wait until morning. You and Paul Revere, I told her. Midnight emergencies get charged at twice the rate. What's the calamity? Her answer came in broken pieces. A telegram. It says, the death of my husband 20 years ago. It was not an accident. They threaten to expose everything unless I pay. I stiffened a little. Telegrams are usually for birthdays, condolences, and baseball scores. They don't often wake me with hints of homicide. Lady, I said, Wolfe regards sleep as holy writ. He doesn't get up for eclipses, earthquakes, or even if the mayor dropped by and spats. Why should a telegram be different? Because, her breath snagged, because it is murder. Please, Mr. Goodwin, I beg you, tonight. I glanced at the ceiling. Wolfe was up there, wrapped in his yellow silk pajamas, probably dreaming of sauces. He'd murder me if I brought him down, but if this was genuine blackmail connected to an old corpse, it would murder me not to. Your name? I asked. Mrs. Eloise Barrington. That one rang a bell. Widow of Charles Barrington, the shipping magnate who had taken a fatal tumble off the SS Halcyon back in the 20s. Official verdict, accident in a storm. Rumour verdict, not so accidental. All right, Mrs. Barrington, you may come, but if you're pulling my leg, I warn you Mr. Wolfe bites harder than I do. 10 minutes later, the doorbell sang its tired note. I stowed the milk, crossed the hall, and let her in. She wore a long sable coat that probably cost the same as a two-bedroom flat on Park Avenue. Beneath it was a dress the colour of storm clouds, with diamonds on her fingers flashing like distress signals. Her face was pale, framed by a hat, with enough feathers to start a pillow fight, and her eyes darted around the hall as if the walls might be wired for scandal. I ushered her into the office. Wolfe's chair at the desk was still empty, so I parked her on the red leather one opposite. You'll forgive the ungodly hour, she murmured, clutching her handbag like a drowning sailor to driftwood. But this cannot wait. Nothing personal, but everything can wait until breakfast, I said. Except maybe a fire in the pantry. Still, you've made it this far, so let's not waste the scenery. I tapped the bell cord. A few moments later, the shuffling thunder of Wolfe's descent came from the hall. When the elevator doors opened, there he was, mountainous, robe-belted, eyes narrowed like a magistrate hauled from bed. Confound it, Archie, he rumbled. What offence justifies this outrage? A lady in distress, I said. And before you order me executed, she claims she's being blackmailed about a 20-year-old murder. That word did it. Wolfe hates moving after dark, but he hates the word murder more when it's floating unsolved. He lowered himself into the chair behind his desk and arranged the robe over his bulk like Caesar donning a toga. You are Mrs. Barrington, he said. She nodded, lips trembling. Yes, widow of Charles Barrington. State the matter with precision, Wolfe commanded. She fished in her handbag and drew out the folded telegram. Her hands shook enough that the diamonds shivered too. She passed it to me, and I spread it on Wolfe's blotter. Pay or face ruin. No signature, no return address, just a neat typed strip glued to the form, words clipped and economical like someone who charged per syllable. Wolfe's eyes lingered on it. Not the composition of a ruffian, he observed. The diction is precise, educated. I chimed in. Also expensive. Western Union doesn't sell its telegrams by the yard. Mrs. Barrington clasped her gloved hands tight. You understand, gentlemen, this means everything. My husband's name has stood honoured in shipping circles for decades. If vile suspicions are revived now— Wolfe cut her off with a raised hand. Madam, spare us the litany. A man either died by mischance or by malign intent. Words cannot alter the fact. But if you employ me, candour is indispensable. I will not be deceived. If you withhold the smallest detail, I shall terminate my interest forthwith. She flinched as though he had struck her. For a long beat she stared at the rug. Then, very low. There were always whispers that Charles was pushed, that it was not the sea that killed him, but another's hand. Who whispered? Wolfe demanded. Crewmen, rivals. His own brother, Henry, was suspected in dark corners, but the inquiry was closed. She stopped herself, colour draining. I watched her carefully. This was a woman who had practised poise for decades but was now unravelling like an old rope. Still, she wasn't clumsy. Every pause, every tremor might have been designed for effect. Pfui, Wolfe muttered. Blackmailers thrive on the cowardice of the well-heeled. You will pay nothing. Instead, you will place the matter entirely in my hands. Archie. Yes, sir. Make a note. Tomorrow at 9, when I ascend to the Orchids, you will contact Mr. Cohen of the Gazette. Have him retrieve all reportage concerning the Halcyon of 1925. By 11, I expect a précis. Check. I flipped a pad open and scribbled, though I could have recited it backward. Wolfe returned his gaze to Mrs. Barrington. Until I have facts, I make no promise of success. But if you employ me, my fee is $5,000, payable forthwith. She gasped, then straightened. Very well. I will have a draft delivered at once. Tomorrow, Wolfe said firmly. Now Archie will escort you home. I decline to detain a lady past midnight in my office, especially when I require my bed. I helped her into her coat, noting that the fur smelled faintly of lilac water, expensive cover for nerves. At the door she whispered, You believe me, don't you, Mr. Goodwin? I believe somebody out there likes telegrams better than sleep, I told her, and I don't like either. When she was gone, I returned to find Wolfe already levered from his chair, preparing for the elevator. Archie, he said, voice thick with fatigue, have Fritz see to the locks. I will require beer tomorrow, chilled at the usual hours. Beyond that, do not disturb me until 9. Yes, sir. Sweet dreams of telegrams and tides. He gave me one of his looks, the kind that could curdle cream, then vanished upward. I poured the last of my milk, considered the telegram on the desk, and muttered, Here's hoping Western Union gives discounts for bulk orders, because something tells me this won't be the last. Then I snapped off the desk lamp, leaving the office in darkness except for the square of light cast by the telegram, lying there like a ghost from 1925 come to demand its due. At 9:30 the next morning, I was back at the desk, tapping Wolfe's dictation from last week, just to keep my fingers limber and my conscience quiet. Fritz had already disappeared into the kitchen to tinker with lunch, and the office was warm from the fire Wolfe had insisted be lit before breakfast. Snow had begun falling again outside, a lazy sift of white that made the street look half asleep. Wolfe was ensconced in his chair, a mountain draped in brown silk, frowning at the ceiling as though it had misquoted Tacitus. Mrs. Eloise Barrington was back, punctual as a funeral bell. She'd shed the sable for a dove-grey coat, her hat smaller this time, but her eyes still rimmed with the kind of fatigue that doesn't come from late bridge parties. She carried herself with a brittle dignity, as if each step risked splintering something invisible. I showed her in, and she lowered herself onto the red leather chair across from Wolfe's desk. Wolfe raised a finger, and I knew the drill. Silence until His Majesty decreed otherwise. I went back to my typewriter, pretending to be deaf while Wolfe studied her as if she were a particularly uncooperative puzzle box. "Madam," he began finally, "we will dispense with preliminaries. Your husband's death. Recount it." Her breath caught. It was in 1925. Charles was aboard the SS Halcyon on a voyage from Havana. There was a storm. The official report says he slipped on the upper deck and fell. He struck the railing and... She faltered. He was lost. Wolfe's eyes closed, his head leaning back. Official accounts are seldom designed to edify. Who benefited? Her gloved hands twisted in her lap. His brother, Henry Barrington. The company was always intended to pass to Charles, but with his death, Henry assumed control. He prospered. I was well provided for, but not given a seat in the firm. Charles's shares reverted under the family trust. Wolfe opened his eyes, narrowed now. Money. Always money. Did you suspect Henry? There were whispers, rival captains, society gossips. I told myself they were slanders. Her lips trembled. Henry was charming when he wished, but he coveted the helm of Barrington Shipping, and Charles, though brilliant, was obstinate. They quarrelled bitterly. I swiveled around, elbows propped on the desk. That's all touching, but what makes the corpse stir now? Charles has been feeding the fishes 20 years. Why send telegrams in 1947? Her gaze flicked to me, defensive. Because Henry died last month. Suddenly. A stroke. The company passed to his son, Peter. He is not of the same temperament. He is young, reckless. Perhaps someone believes the family is vulnerable now. Wolfe grunted. Indeed. The death of a patriarch loosens knots. A new scion invites wolves. I said, so the time is perfect for a blackmailer to wave a 20-year-old skeleton. Question is, are they after your pocketbook or Peter's? Her mouth tightened. The telegram was addressed to me, to my residence. Wolfe's finger drummed once on the desk. But its leverage lies in the family fortune. Ergo, the source is one who knows both the past and the present, someone with knowledge of the Halcyon affair, emboldened by Henry's demise. She shifted uncomfortably. Do you mean someone inside the family? I mean, Wolfe said evenly, someone who wishes to extract lucre while inflicting maximal damage. That is invariably someone close enough to wound. I leaned forward. Mrs. Barrington, forgive the candour, but last night you sold this as hysteria. Now you admit there's plenty of kindling for scandal. What aren't you telling us? Her eyes flashed. Nothing. I swear it. Wolfe's brows lowered like portcullises. I caution you again. If you deceive me, I will abandon the matter instantly. Phooey. I do not wrestle shadows for clients who hide behind veils. She looked stricken. I have told you everything. Charles was lost, Henry inherited, and now Peter reigns. That is the truth. It might have been, but her tone carried too much embroidery. Still, Wolfe let it pass, for now. He pressed fingertips together, considering. Archie, he said. Note, the succession of Barrington Shipping. From Charles to Henry, now to Peter. The telegram's emergence correlates precisely with the transfer of power. That is not coincidence. Noted, I said, striking the keys. I'll send a thank you note to fate for arranging it so neatly. Mrs. Barrington's voice rose in sudden defensiveness. Surely you don't think Peter, my nephew by marriage, would stoop to such vile games? Madam, Wolfe said, I think nothing until compelled, but I require clarity. Who else was aboard the Halcyon that night? Her brow furrowed. I was not. Charles travelled alone, save for the crew and a handful of business acquaintances. There was talk of a quarrel with Henry on the dock before departure, but Henry swore he never boarded. That was the end of it. That was a red herring served on silver. If Henry never boarded, suspicion dies at customs, or so she wanted us to think. Wolfe sighed through his nose. Enough for now. Archie will pursue the record in the Gazette. I must attend to my orchids. Mrs. Barrington blinked. Now? But this is urgent. It is, Wolfe agreed, levering himself up with majestic slowness. But my plants are more so. They depend upon me. You, madam, must wait. Good day. Her lips parted in outrage, but Wolfe was already pressing the bell cord. The elevator groaned in the hall as it descended to collect him. He nodded once at me and vanished. That left me with the widow and the fire snapping in the grate. She looked at me with something between appeal and fury. Is he always like that? Always, I said cheerfully. If you think this was rough, you should see him when the soufflé falls. Her eyes glistened. I came here in good faith, Mr. Goodwin. And you'll leave in it too. Don't mind Wolfe. He's allergic to secrets that aren't his. But if there's more, for your own sake, spill it now. She shook her head. I've told you all I know, truly. Maybe. Or maybe she had told us the polite version. Either way, her perfume lingered in the office long after she left, mingling with the smell of wood smoke and typewriter ribbon. At 10:47 the bell rang again. Fritz with a tray, Wolfe's command from above. 2 chilled glasses of beer, one for the great man, one for his orchids. Fritz had them ready. I took them up like dispatches from Olympus, and found him already lost among the blossoms, lecturing Theodore Horstmann on humidity levels, as though civilization hinged on them. "Report, Archie," he demanded. "Nothing earth-shaking." Widow repeats the official line. Charles slipped, Henry inherited, Peter's now the new captain. The timing stinks, though. Henry's death and all. He sniffed. "Precisely. Attend to the Gazette. By lunch I require the bones of that storm." "Yes, sir." I left him to his orchids and went back downstairs. Snow was still tumbling outside, burying the city in silence. Inside, the fire had burned low, and the widow's perfume still hung faint and accusing. I rolled a fresh sheet into the typewriter and started a note-card file. Halcyon, 1925. Charles Barrington. Death by fall. Henry inherits. Peter. Present heir. The letters clicked against the paper, tidy soldiers ready for Wolfe's inspection. I sat back, stretched, and muttered, "If telegrams can raise the dead, we'd better buy a bigger blotter." If you want a quick education in how New York digests scandal, you skip the library and head straight to the Gazette. A morgue clerk can tell you more about the city's sins than a dozen preachers, and with better grammar. At 11:15 sharp, after Wolfe had floated off to his orchids, I took myself and my hat down to 42nd Street to see what Lon Cohen could scare up. The Gazette newsroom was in its usual state of controlled collapse, phones jangling, typewriters clattering like a platoon of machine guns, and smoke curling toward the ceiling in spirals thick enough to choke an elephant. Reporters were bent over desks hammering out copy about aldermanic scandals, Broadway divorces, and the latest murder that hadn't yet crossed Wolfe's blotter. Lon Cohen was perched on the corner of his desk with a coffee mug in one hand and a cigarette in the other, looking like a man who had been born with a press pass clipped to his ear. When he saw me, his eyebrows went up. "Well, well, if it isn't Archie Goodwin. Tell me Wolfe finally strangled a senator, or are you here for a lighter yarn?" "Neither," I said, taking a chair opposite. "But if Wolfe ever did strangle a senator, you'd get the exclusive. Today I need a little archaeology. Dig me up everything on the SS Halcyon, vintage 1925. His whistle was low. "That old tub, you're scraping barnacles. What's the angle?" "Client privilege." He made a face. "That means Barrington money. I've seen their ads plastered on our shipping page for 20 years. You're playing with matches." "Matches are fun," I said. "So is Wolfe when he's got a puzzle. How about those clippings?" Lon stubbed his cigarette and jerked his chin at a cub reporter. "Hey, Harry, get down to the morgue. Halcyon 25, accident at sea, bring the file." While we waited, he poured me a coffee that tasted like it had been percolating since Prohibition. "So what's Wolfe think, that Charles Barrington was pushed instead of tripped?" "Client privilege," I repeated. "But let's say I'm curious about whether the Atlantic had help that night." Harry returned, lugging a manila folder fat enough to choke a filing cabinet. Lon spread the clippings across his desk. Headlines screamed, "Shipping magnate lost in storm" and "Halcyon." "Tragedy strikes New York dynasty." Grainy photographs showed Charles Barrington in top hat and tails beside his sleek wife Eloise, and another of Henry, the surviving brother, shaking hands with stockholders 2 weeks after the funeral. I scanned the witness statements. A steward swore Charles had been drinking heavily, stumbling along the deck before the fall. But another clipping quoted a fellow passenger, one Miss Clara Vane, who wrote in her diary that Charles had quarrelled loudly with someone just before he went overboard. The someone remained unnamed. "Contradiction number 1, I muttered. "Drunken stumble or heated quarrel, can't be both." Lon tapped the page. "There's more. See here. Captain's log insists the seas were rough, visibility poor, but other passengers told reporters the storm had already eased by the time Barrington disappeared. Papered over? I said, or edited for the sake of Barrington shipping shares. Newspapers love to soften a blow if the advertiser buys enough column inches. Lon shrugged, unoffended. We sell truth by the pound, depending on who's paying, but I'll tell you this. There were whispers about Henry. He had motive. He was next in line, and Charles had no intention of stepping aside. Problem was, Henry had an alibi, supposedly stayed ashore. I rifled further. Names leapt out. The steward, Thomas Keever, the diary girl, Clara Vane, a junior officer, Alfred Slocum, and a society hanger-on, Sylvia Harker, who had been listed on the passenger roll. She was quoted only once, dismissing the whole thing as an unfortunate accident. Any of these still alive? I asked. Lon gave a non-committal grunt. Keever? Maybe. Last I heard he retired to Hoboken. Clara Vane married a banker and vanished to Boston. Harker? I think she still floats around the fringes of Broadway, too fond of gin to vanish entirely. That stirred my ears. A gin-soaked actress who remembered too much could be useful or dangerous, depending on who asked. I slid the diary excerpt aside. This Clara Vane, did the Gazette ever publish the full diary? Nope, just excerpts. The rest was locked up tighter than an alderman's wallet. We never saw the originals. Convenient, I said. Any mention of hush money? Lon grinned. Archie, hush money never leaves a receipt, but I'll bet my typewriter ribbon somebody paid to keep certain mouths closed. The Barringtons had deep pockets and thicker skins. I pocketed the names, jotting them in Wolfe's note-card shorthand. The clatter of typewriters around us filled the gaps. Somewhere a copyboy shouted about late editions. The newsroom hummed like a hive fed on nicotine and scandal. Lon leaned closer. Look, Archie, you didn't hear this from me, but the Barrington name still carries weight. Peter Barrington, Henry's kid. He's flashy, reckless. But the board loves him because he throws parties that keep stockholders distracted. If you start sniffing too hard around the halcyon, somebody's going to bark, loud. I'll bring earplugs, I said. But thanks for the tip. One last thing. Did you ever hear a whisper about Eloise herself being under suspicion? His eyebrows climbed. The widow? No. She was young, glamorous, the grieving beauty. The press loved her. Besides, she had no obvious gain. Henry got the company, not her, unless she liked widowhood for its own sake. It was a red herring, but worth dangling. She liked diamonds, I said. Maybe they came with the widowhood. Lon chuckled. Archie, you're a cynic after my own heart. All right, that's all I've got. Just remember, Barrington Shipping still buys half our ad space. If Wolfe drags their skeletons onto Broadway, the Gazette will print, but the board will howl. I rose, sliding my notes into my coat. You tell the board to send their howls directly to Nero Wolfe. He enjoys symphonies. Lon snorted. Yeah, and you'll enjoy the ulcer Kramer gets when he finds out you're stirring this stew. Go easy, Archie. Or don't. I like a good front-page brawl. By the time I hit the street, the snow had turned to slush, taxis hissing through puddles that splashed my shoes. I ducked into a diner for a quick sandwich and a glass of milk before heading back. Wolfe would already be descending from his orchids, ready to devour my notes along with Fritz's lunch at 1. I chewed on both the sandwich and the contradiction. A steward swearing to drunkenness, a diary hinting at a quarrel. One of them was lying, or both were shading. Either way, somebody on the halcyon had known more than they told the press, and 20 years later a telegram was rattling the bones. When I stepped back into the brownstone at precisely 12:40, Fritz was polishing glasses in the dining room, the smell of braised veal wafting out like a promise. I waved and headed for the office. The fire was burning low, waiting. I rolled a clean sheet into the typewriter and began typing the day's findings, the clack of keys echoing what I'd heard in the newsroom. Outside, the city roared. Inside, the words lined up neat and orderly, destined for Wolfe's digestion. And if Barrington Shipping didn't like it, they could send me another telegram. I was beginning to collect them. By the time Wolfe emerged from his orchids at 4 and handed down his orders, I was already itching for an excuse to get out. Fritz had pressed a sandwich into me at lunch that was fit to make a bishop resign, and my conscience was clean enough to survive a little nightlife. Wolfe naturally decreed that I was to look in on Peter Barrington, new prince of the Barrington Shipping dynasty, and see what kind of heir he made. So, at 9:05 p.m., While Wolfe was safely locked in mortal combat with Fritz's duck and burgundy, I was climbing into an elevator that smelled of cigars and perfume in equal doses. The penthouse atop the Marlborough Towers was buzzing. When the doors opened, it was like stepping into the stock exchange at cocktail hour. Too much noise, too much liquor, too many people who had never learnt the price of anything except champagne. Peter Barrington was easy to spot. He was the one with the broad grin and the narrow tie, juggling a martini in one hand and a cigarette in the other, while a trio of willowy brunettes leaned in like vines looking for something to climb. He looked about 30, slick hair, tailored dinner jacket, and a restlessness in his eyes that made me think of a racehorse pacing before the gun. "Goodwin," he boomed when someone whispered my name in his ear. "Nero Wolfe's man Friday, come to sample civilization." "I'll settle for a martini," I said. "The civilization part I'll judge later." A waiter appeared with something frosty and expensive, and I let the glass sweat in my hand while I took in the room. The penthouse was all chrome and glass, with a view of Midtown's neons spilling in like fireworks. The crowd was a stew of Wall Street brokers, Park Avenue models, and one or two faces that had probably been invited for their wallets rather than their wit. I steered Peter toward a quieter alcove, which meant only one piano and two couples necking instead of the full orchestra. "I won't waste your party," I told him, "but Wolfe was asked to glance at a telegram, and it seems to have your family crest stamped all over it." Peter's grin flickered. "Telegram. Oh, that nonsense. Some crank playing games with Uncle Charles's accident." "Accident?" I lifted an eyebrow. "That word's been earning overtime for 20 years. His cigarette trembled before he stubbed it out. "Look, my father never believed those whispers. Neither do I. Uncle Charles slipped. He was careless. That's all." But his eyes were darting around the room, hunting for ears. The unease was there, hiding under the gin and bravado. I sipped the martini. "Funny thing, though, the telegram didn't ask you for money. It asked your aunt." He barked a laugh too loud. "Then she should pay it and leave me out of it." "That's not Wolfe's style," I said. "Blackmailers don't stop with one bite. They chew until they hit bone. Whoever sent that note is betting that the new boss of Barrington Shipping doesn't want skeletons rattling chains." His face tightened, but before he could answer, a voice cut across the chatter. "Oh, don't be coy, Peter. Everyone knows your uncle didn't fall." The words hung in the air like smoke. Conversation faltered. Heads turned. The speaker was a woman of indeterminate age with blonde hair that had been coaxed into curls a decade too late. She was perched on a divan, glass in hand, laughter already forming at her lips. I recognized her from Lon Cohen's clippings, Sylvia Harker, the actress with a memory and a taste for gin. Peter snapped, "Sylvia, shut up." She giggled, unrepentant. "What? It's true. Everyone in our circle knew it. Charles was pushed. Only question was who gave the shove." A hush rolled through the penthouse. I watched Peter's jaw lock, his bravado cracking like cheap plaster. I put my drink down. "That's a pretty statement, Miss Harker. Care to provide footnotes?" Her eyes fluttered in my direction, unfocused. "Why should I? It was ages ago. None of it matters now." But it did matter, and Peter knew it. He grabbed her arm, hissing in her ear. She laughed again, twisting away, spilling gin on her silk. I said lightly, "Maybe we should all forget Miss Harker's contribution for tonight. Chalk it up to an excess of inspiration." There was a ripple of nervous laughter. The music struck up again, too loud, as though the bandleader wanted to erase the last 30 seconds from memory. Peter tugged me aside. His grin was gone, replaced by something harder. "Listen, Goodwin, Sylvia talks too much. Don't take her seriously." "Sure," I said. "Gin makes lousy testimony. But funny thing, she wasn't mentioned in the Gazette clippings I read. Maybe she wasn't supposed to be." He glared. "You don't know these people. They'd sell gossip for a nickel." "Or for 20 years of hush money," I countered. That hit him. He flinched, then tried to cover with a laugh. "You've got a wild imagination. Just tell Wolfe the telegram's a crank stunt and leave the family alone." "Sorry," I said. "Wolfe doesn't play on command. He conducts." His eyes narrowed. "Then tell him this. If he drags my family name through the mud, I'll use every lawyer and every column inch to bury him." I grinned. That'll make him happy. He likes a challenge. At midnight, I peeled away from the penthouse. The music was still thumping, the laughter louder than ever, but Sylvia was hunched at the bar, refilling her glass, and Peter was pacing like a man whose party had gone sour. Outside, the neon rain of Broadway gleamed off wet sidewalks, and taxis hissed past like quicksilver. I lit a cigarette and thought about Wolfe, probably upstairs by now with his second beer, never stirring from the brownstone yet pulling strings strong enough to shake penthouses. The telegram was no crank stunt. Peter's eyes had given that away. Sylvia's loose tongue had hammered it home. Someone had shoved Charles Barrington overboard, or at least convinced half of New York society they had. And 20 years later, the current was still pulling. When I got back to the brownstone at 12:37, the lights in Wolfe's office were dark. I slipped inside, hung up my coat, and jotted Sylvia Harker's name onto Wolfe's notecard file with a flourish. Then I poured myself a last glass of milk, leaned back at the desk, and muttered, "If skeletons throw parties, this family's going to need a bigger ballroom." When you walk into Nero Wolfe's dining room at precisely 1 o'clock, you don't just enter a meal, you enter a shrine. The table is laid with surgical precision. Fritz's silverware gleams as if he polishes each piece with moonlight, and Wolfe sits like a monarch granting a reluctant audience. Later that day, the altar sacrifice was duck à l'orange, and Wolfe was halfway through a breast when I delivered the latest bulletin from the Marlborough Towers. If you've never seen Wolfe eat duck, you've missed an education. His lips close around each morsel like a vault door, and his eyes go glassy with devotion. Fritz hovered at his elbow, beaming like a priest who had just converted a heathen. I waited until Wolfe leaned back for a sip of Burgundy before opening my mouth. "Your nephew Peter Barrington, sir," I began, "is a man with cocktails in his bloodstream, neon in his eyes, and a pack of socialites circling like seagulls. He considers the telegram a crank stunt, but his expression says otherwise. And he had company, one Sylvia Harker, actress emeritus, who dropped a line that would make headline copy if Lon Cohen ever got wind. Your uncle didn't fall. Everyone knows that." Wolfe lowered his glass slowly. "Careless," he said. "Too careless." Exactly my thought. The gin may have been talking, but even gin doesn't invent 20-year-old gossip from whole cloth. He waved Fritz away with the patience of a saint indulging a disciple. Fritz vanished toward the kitchen, leaving Wolfe to pierce me with a look. "You will track her, Archie. This woman, this Miss Harker, is too dangerous to ignore. Loose tongues are seldom accidental. Find out what she knows or who winds her clock." I nodded. Gladly. I enjoy actresses, though I usually prefer them sober. "Pfui." Wolfe reached for another slice of duck. "Also, Archie, the telegram. I require samples of Western Union stationery from Midtown hotels. Bring them here. I wish to compare the typeface." I raised a brow. "You think our blackmailer is bunking in style?" "Evidently. The quality of the impression, the precise centering. This was not a corner telegraph office. It was composed at a desk by someone with access to leisure." I couldn't argue. I'd noticed the neatness myself, though I hadn't told him yet. That's the trouble with Wolfe. He makes a hobby of scooping you with your own observations. At 1:47, Wolfe laid down his fork, dabbed at his mouth with a napkin big enough to tarp a truck, and pushed back from the table. "Come," he said, "to the office." The Brownstones' office is our war room, and when Wolfe installs himself behind the desk, you might as well imagine Caesar in his Senate chair. I parked myself opposite, notes ready. He tapped the bell cord and told Fritz to send Mrs. Barrington in when she arrived. She had been summoned for 2 o'clock. Meanwhile, Wolfe gestured. "Read me your précis." So I did, flipping open the notebook where I jotted Sylvia's careless remark, Peter's nervous bravado, the crowd's uneasy silence afterward. I mentioned her name having popped in Lon Cohen's clippings as a passenger on the Halcyon, though her testimony had been suspiciously muted. Wolfe listened, eyes half closed, fingers drumming once against the desk blotter. When I finished, he said, "That is no accident. She was omitted deliberately. Ergo, either she lied at the time or someone suppressed her." "Or both," I suggested. "A lady can lie and still be hushed for good measure." He ignored me. "Sylvia Harker must be interrogated. Not by me, by you. Her temperament will not endure my severity." "Good," I said. "Your severity sometimes makes mine look like charm school. I'll drop in after she's dried out from last night's gin." At exactly 2:02 the doorbell chimed. Fritz answered it. He won't do legwork, but he does open doors when it suits his sense of formality. And a moment later, Eloise Barrington entered. Today she was in a tailored black suit, pearls tight around her throat, and gloves that squeaked faintly as she twisted them. Wolfe inclined his head. "Mrs. Barrington, you have chosen to return. Good. We progress." She perched on the chair, back straight, eyes darting from me to Wolfe and back again. "Do you have news?" Wolfe's voice was silk covering steel. "News, yes. Certainty, no. One of your nephew's guests made an indiscreet remark. She declared that your late husband did not fall but was pushed. The room froze, which suggests her claim is not unique." Eloise's lips parted, then closed again. She looked down at her gloves. "Sylvia," she whispered, "I should have known. She always drank too much. She was there that night. Charles invited her as part of a society group. She promised me afterward that she would never repeat what she saw." Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "Saw? I mean, what she thought she saw," Eloise said quickly. "She was hysterical. The storm confused everyone. Surely you don't take her seriously." Wolfe's brows climbed an inch. "I take every word seriously, madam. But what I take more seriously is honesty from you. If you conceal further correspondences, other telegrams, notes, threats, I will withdraw instantly." She stiffened. "I assure you I've hidden nothing." I leaned in. "Then maybe you can explain why the telegram paper we received matches what's sold at the St. Albans hotel desk on Madison. I stopped there this morning to check. Not exactly the hangout for cranks." That was a bluff. I hadn't gone yet, but her gasp told me Wolfe was right. The telegram had class. She stammered, "The St. Albans? I don't know anyone there." "Pfui," Wolfe said, sharp as a whip crack. "Someone in your circle does. Reflect carefully before your memory fails again." Eloise flushed, biting her lip. The pearls trembled against her throat. For a long moment the only sound was the fire hissing softly in the grate. Finally she whispered, "Very well. A week ago, before the telegram arrived, I received an unsigned note. It instructed me to have cash prepared, but I dismissed it as a prank. I burned it. I didn't think—" "You thought wrong," Wolfe thundered. "You were warned. You concealed it from me. Never again." She closed her eyes. "I'm sorry." Wolfe settled back, glowering. Contrition is useless. Candour will suffice. Archie will pursue this Harker woman. Meanwhile, you will prepare yourself for further unpleasantness. The more you resist, the sharper the blow when it lands." She nodded miserably. At 2:45, Wolfe rang the bell cord again. Fritz appeared, silent as a ghost, and escorted her out. The door closed, and Wolfe exhaled through his nose, a gust like a bull adjusting its footing. "Well," I said, "you've given her the full Old Testament treatment. Want me to get the New Testament next time?" "Silence," he ordered. "Attend. The origin of the telegram is the key. Secure samples. Confirm the source. Then, Archie, tighten the net around Sylvia Harker. She is our most promising fracture in this edifice of lies." I rose. "Consider it done, but you'll have to excuse me if I don't bring back any telegrams signed with lipstick." He ignored the wisecrack, already reaching for the beer Fritz had left on the side table. The brownstone had returned to its rhythm, orchids above, Fritz in the kitchen, and Wolfe in his fortress, dictating strategy as if Manhattan were a chessboard. I jotted a final note card. Telegram, St. Albans Hotel. Harker, loose tongue. Widow admits earlier note. Then I filed it neatly, shut the drawer, and leaned back. The war had begun, and our brownstone was the fortress. And if telegrams were the artillery, we were about to find out who was firing the first barrage. Following actresses is one of the perks of my trade. Following them into shabby apartments with peeling wallpaper is less glamorous, but it's still a step up from chasing down accountants. At 7:20 p.m. sharp, I parked the Roadster outside a narrow walk-up on West 52nd that looked like it had been built when Grover Cleveland was still spry. The doorman, if you could call him that, was an old gent asleep on a stool, and he didn't stir when I climbed the stairs. The third-floor hallway smelled of gin and cheap perfume. I knocked, and after a pause filled with shuffling feet, the door opened. Sylvia Harker stood framed in the crack, one hand still clutching the chain on the lock. The glamour she'd worn at Peter Barrington's penthouse had been dimmed by a day's hangover. She was in a satin dressing gown that had seen better stages, hair pinned up in a hurry, rouge smeared where her hand had wiped away sweat. "Well, the detective," she slurred, though not without charm. Come to scold me for speaking truths at parties. Not scold, I said, easing a smile. I just thought we might have a civilized conversation in a less civilized setting. May I? She hesitated, then unhooked the chain. The apartment was dim, lit by a table lamp with a crooked shade. Velvet curtains, faded to a dull brown, hung heavy over the window. A stack of playbills curled on a side table, relics of roles long gone. The smell of gin was thick enough to be bottled. She flopped onto a couch with the kind of grace only rehearsed exhaustion can manage. If you want a drink, help yourself. The bottle's there. I poured 2 fingers into a glass that had lipstick stains predating the Roosevelt administration. I sipped politely. Gin and I have never been on speaking terms. About last night, I began. You made quite a splash. Her laugh was brittle. Splash? I dropped a stone in a swamp, darling. No one cares about Charles Barrington anymore. Funny. Someone cared enough to send telegrams about him, and you cared enough to say he didn't fall. She swirled her glass, eyes half closed. Because he didn't. I was there, you know, on the Halcyon. I saw it. That quickened me. Saw what, exactly? Her lips twisted. Charles and Henry. They argued. On deck. The sea was calmer by then, but the air crackled. I followed, well, not followed, wandered near. Charles was shouting. Henry was hissing like a tea kettle. Then Charles went over the rail. Did you see Henry push him? Her eyes glazed. I saw Charles's hands flail. Henry's hands... She broke off, fumbling with her glass. It was dark, a storm. Perhaps I imagined, but I swear, Henry was right there, and then Charles was gone. The gin had fogged her memory so thick I could hardly cut through it with a machete. Still, the picture was sharper than I liked. Charles Barrington quarrelling with his brother, a sudden fall, and Henry inheriting a fortune. Funny, I said. Your name doesn't appear in the Gazette's coverage, not once. Her smile was thin. Because it was bought away, I was paid to keep my mouth shut. That stirred the air. By whom? She tilted her head, the rouge catching the lamp glow. Does it matter? A Barrington cheque is a Barrington cheque. It came monthly through a trust. No one signed, but I knew. And you cashed them? Of course. Darling, an actress must live. And no one wanted the scandal. Not Eloise, not Henry, especially not Henry. He was very persuasive. Her voice dropped on the last 2 words. I let silence stretch, the old velvet curtains swallowing the noise from the street. You realize, I said, you've just confessed to being the one person alive who claims Henry Barrington committed murder. Claims? Her eyes flashed. I know what I saw. You just said you might have imagined it. She leaned forward, breath warm with gin. Don't play games with me, Goodwin. You think I'm a drunk old has-been. Fine. But I remember Henry's eyes that night. Cold, ruthless. He wanted Charles gone. Red herring or not, it was the first direct allegation, and it painted Henry with tar. But Henry was conveniently dead, which made him both the perfect culprit and the perfect shield. Why spill it now, I asked. 20 years of silence, and suddenly you loosen your tongue at a cocktail party. She laughed again, bitter. Because Henry's gone. No more cheques. And Peter doesn't care. He prefers his money for champagne, not hush funds. So why shouldn't I speak? Maybe because words get people killed, I said softly. You noticed how the room went quiet last night? Her smile faltered. For the first time, uncertainty cracked through the gin. She shivered. Do you think they'd hurt me? I think the Barrington name is a porcelain vase with a crack. Somebody is tapping it with a hammer, and you just volunteered to hold it when it breaks. She drained the glass, hands trembling. Then protect me, Mr. Goodwin. Isn't that what detectives do? Sometimes. Other times we just ask questions and hope the answers don't kill us first. She slumped back, pulling her robe tighter. Well, you've had your fun. Tell Wolfe what you like. But remember, truth is expensive, and memory is fickle. I rose, leaving the gin glass on the table. I'll tell Wolfe, and I'll also tell him you're a lousy liar. If you're holding anything back, you'd better hope the Barringtons get to you before he does. He's less forgiving. She chuckled weakly. Then heaven help me. The apartment seemed to shrink as I stepped out. the faded velvet curtains swaying slightly as if eavesdropping. On the street, the neon flickered against puddles, and the air was sharp with February cold. At 9:02, I slid into the roadster and steered back toward 35th Street. Wolfe would be waiting, eyebrows cocked like pistols, demanding every word, and I would have to tell him that Sylvia Harker, actress emeritus, had just accused a dead man of murder, an accusation soaked in gin and 20 years of silence. The brownstone loomed warm against the night when I reached it. Inside, the fire was lit, and Fritz had left a glass of milk waiting at Wolfe's desk, knowing my habits better than I do. I sat, rolled in a fresh sheet of paper, and began typing. Sylvia Harker, halcyon passenger, claims Henry pushed Charles, paid off for silence, now cut loose, dangerously loose. As the keys clattered, Wolfe's voice rumbled from the elevator behind me. "Well, Archie?" I didn't turn. "She gave us our first shove, sir. Now it's your move." At 10:16 the next morning, I was at Wolfe's desk, typing up last night's little melodrama with Sylvia Harker. The ribbon was running faint, which meant I was smudging Wolfe's sacred note cards, but that was his problem. My problem was that the doorbell went off like a fire drill. I crossed the hall and opened it to find Inspector Kramer in all his glory, hat yanked low, overcoat dusted with slush, and a cigar clamped in his teeth that had been chewed down to the thickness of a matchstick. Behind him, Pearlie Stebbins loomed with the permanent expression of a man who has been kicked by life and decided to kick back. "Goodwin," Kramer barked. "Tell your boss I'm coming in whether he likes it or not." "Why spoil a fine morning with threats?" I said. "But sure, step inside. The office fire's warm and Wolfe's temper is cooler than yours, so maybe you'll thaw out." They clomped in, bringing the smell of wet wool and cheap cigars. Wolfe was already behind his desk, an open bottle of beer and a chilled glass at his elbow, the foam just settling. He looked up as though we were interrupting him in the middle of a coronation. "Inspector," he said flatly, "your presence is never a boon. What is it this time?" Kramer didn't waste breath. He tossed his hat on the couch and jabbed the cigar at Wolfe like a weapon. "You're meddling in the Barrington business. Don't deny it. Somebody's already told me you've got Eloise Barrington parading in here at midnight with telegrams about her dead husband. You're sticking your nose where it doesn't belong." Wolfe sipped delicately at his glass. "My nose, Inspector, goes where I'm paid to put it. I am retained." "That's exactly the problem," Kramer growled. "The Barringtons aren't some petty burglary case. They're political patrons. They bankroll half the city council. If you stir up 20-year-old muck, you'll make enemies high enough to roast you." I couldn't resist. "Enemies high enough, Inspector, or drunk enough?" Kramer spun on me. "Shut your trap, Goodwin. I'm talking to him, not you." "Talk is cheap," I said sweetly. "Yours is wholesale." "Archie." Wolfe's tone cracked like a whip. I shut my mouth, though not before giving Kramer a grin that made his cigar tremble with rage. Kramer rounded back on Wolfe. "You think you're clever, sitting here drinking beer while your errand boy digs up dirt. But I'm telling you, drop this. If a blackmailer's fishing, let the Barringtons call me. We'll handle it." Wolfe's lids drooped. "You?" "Yes, me. The police. Ever hear of us?" "Indeed," Wolfe said. "I have heard of the police. I am less persuaded of their efficacy. 20 years ago you, or rather your predecessors, closed the case of Charles Barrington's death as an accident. Now evidence arises that it was not. Forgive me if I prefer my own scrutiny." Kramer's face turned a shade that would have matched Fritz's beet soup. "You pompous, listen, Wolfe. You so much as sneeze in this case, and I'll have the DA slap a subpoena on you. I'll haul you to Centre Street and grill you till you squeal." "Pfui," Wolfe said, and the beer glass clinked back to the desk. "You will do no such thing. I'm engaged professionally. Your jurisdiction does not extend to my judgment. If you wish enlightenment, bring me evidence, not threats." Pearlie Stebbins finally spoke, his voice as blunt as a hammer. "We got a tip you've been talking to Sylvia Harker. That lush hasn't told the truth since she learned how to lie." I leaned back. "She told enough last night to make Peter Barrington look like he wanted the floor to open under him. If she's lying, she's picked a juicy subject." Kramer snorted. "She's lying because she's broke and wants attention. I know Harker's type. Don't build castles on gin fumes." Wolfe's eyes flickered open. "Perhaps, but even a drunk may mutter truth in her stupor, and she was conveniently excised from all newspaper accounts of the Halcyon affair. That interests me." It interests me that you know so much already, Kramer shot back, which means somebody in the Barrington circle is whispering in your ear, and that, Wolfe, makes my job harder. So I'm telling you, hands off. Impossible, Wolfe said, settling deeper into his chair. Mrs. Barrington has paid my retainer. I am bound. To withdraw now would be unprofessional. Kramer stabbed the air with his cigar. You're hiding behind your damned retainer again. One of these days that excuse won't save you. Inspector, Wolfe said with icy patience, if you expect me to abdicate at the threat of your bluster, you overrate yourself, and do not dribble ash on my rug. That nearly did it. Kramer's jaw clenched and the cigar shook like it wanted to jump out of his teeth. For a moment I thought he might pitch it at Wolfe's head, and I was rooting for it just for the fun of seeing Wolfe dodge. But instead he shoved it back in his mouth and barked, "Fine, play your game. But when it blows up, and it will, you'll be the first I drag downtown. Don't say I didn't warn you." He turned to go, overcoat swinging like a cape. Pearlie followed, grunting something under his breath that sounded like a curse on all private detectives and their mothers. At the door, Kramer paused, glaring back. "Oh, and one more thing. Whoever leaked your name to me is inside the Barrington circle. You figure out who. It might save your fat neck." The door slammed hard enough to rattle Fritz's china in the kitchen. Silence stretched in the office, broken only by the pop of the fire. Wolfe reached calmly for his beer, poured another inch into the glass, and lifted it. "Well," I said, "that was refreshing. Nothing like Kramer to start the day with a coronary." Wolfe sipped. "Archie, note, our involvement is no longer secret. The police are watching, therefore proceed with doubled caution." "Noted," I said, rolling a clean sheet into the typewriter. "But for the record, sir, I enjoy needling Kramer. Keeps me young." "Your youth is no justification for impudence," Wolfe intoned. "Now, to business. Miss Harker must be pursued further, and the source of the telegram, still obscured, must be located. Begin." I tapped the first line, letting the clatter of the typewriter drown out the echo of Kramer's threats. Wolfe leaned back, glass in hand, the smoke of Kramer's cigar still hanging in the room like a duel that hadn't quite ended. And I thought, not for the first time, that if Wolfe and Kramer ever truly went to war, Manhattan wouldn't need streetlights. The sparks would light the whole island. If you want the city to spit in your eye, let it ring your phone at midnight. Again. That's what happened to me at 12:11 a.m., when the penthouse crowd decided life wasn't noisy enough without dragging me back uptown. Peter Barrington's voice came ragged over the line, strained with something more than gin. "Goodwin, get here, fast. Sylvia, she's—" he choked. "Just get here." 10 minutes later I was climbing the gilded stairs of the Marlborough Towers again, wondering if Wolfe's orchids could survive without me until dawn. A cop on the door told me it was Unit E, top floor, and I could hear the wail of sirens from the street even up there. Inside was chaos. Uniformed cops swarming, flashbulbs popping, and the smell of cordite still sharp enough to sting the nose. Sylvia Harker lay on a chaise longue like an actress taking her final bow. Only this curtain didn't rise again. A revolver rested neatly by her side, her head tilted, blonde curls fallen across her cheek. Her lipstick hadn't smudged, though the glass of gin on the side table trembled in a nervous handprint. And in her right hand, clenched tight, was a telegram. I bent and read it. The words were short, brutal, and familiar. The truth will be revealed. No signature, no address. A twin to the one Eloise Barrington had brought us. Kramer was already there, cigar blazing, voice even louder. "Goodwin," he roared. "So this is what happens when Wolfe starts sticking his fat nose where it doesn't belong. A woman dead. Congratulations." I straightened. "Come on, Inspector. If Wolfe had pushed her, you'd have heard the thud in your office downtown." "Don't get smart," Kramer growled. "She's got a telegram in her hand that says somebody was squeezing her, and guess who she was talking to yesterday? You." Pearlie Stebbins loomed behind him, arms folded like a bulldog waiting for a bone. "Looks like your gal couldn't handle the pressure, Goodwin. Pulled the trigger herself." "Maybe," I said, surveying the scene. "Except that glass of gin hasn't tipped. Her lipstick's perfect, and the gun's lying there like a stage prop. Even Sylvia Harker wasn't tidy enough for that kind of exit." Kramer glared. "You're suggesting murder? Prove it." "Not tonight. Tonight I'm just suggesting your corpse doesn't fit the script." Peter Barrington stumbled out of the bedroom, shirt half-buttoned, face pale. His eyes were wide, like he'd seen the Atlantic rise again. "It wasn't me. She locked herself in here. When I heard the shot—" He faltered, looking around at the uniforms. "She was like that, I swear it." Kramer pounced. "You called Goodwin before you called us. Why?" Peter's voice cracked. "Because I panicked. He was here last night. He knows. I didn't know what to do." That was enough to make the cops murmur. I knew the look. A rich kid one step from being dragged down to Center Street for an overnight in the cooler. I cut in. "Easy, Inspector. Peter's guilty of poor taste in decor and worse taste in gin. But shooting his own guest? Doesn't fit. He's too busy trying to impress brokers with his champagne budget." Peter sagged onto a chair, head in hands. Kramer barked for the uniforms to cordon the apartment and get the medical examiner. The flashbulbs popped again, lighting Sylvia's body like a grotesque photo spread. I leaned closer for another look. The revolver was too clean, too placed. And the telegram, creased but unburned, was right there in her hand, as though someone wanted us to be sure she had read it. Red herring or truth, I couldn't tell, but the echo of Eloise's telegram was too neat to ignore. Kramer turned back to me, jabbing with his cigar. "Tell Wolfe this. He's finished. I'll have the DA on his fat back tomorrow. He drags me into one more society scandal, and I'll bury him so deep he'll have to send his orchids a change of address card." "Inspector," I said, "if you buried Wolfe, you'd need a crane and a special permit." His eyes bulged. "Goodwin." But Pearlie caught his elbow. "Boss, let it go. We'll get more when the doc comes." Kramer snarled, but he backed off, turning on his heel. "You tell Wolfe I'm watching him. Every step, every move, and if he's hiding one scrap of evidence, God help him." They stomped out, leaving me with the corpse and the smell of powder. The apartment buzzed with uniforms, neighbors whispering in the hall, the neon city glittering through the wide windows like 1,000 eyes. I took one last look at Sylvia. Her hand was still clamped around the telegram, like a final gesture. Maybe she had held it willingly. Maybe it had been pressed there. Either way, her last act was scripted by someone else. At 1:03 I walked out into the night. The city was slick with rain, the neon bleeding red and blue off the wet pavement. My coat collar was up, my hands deep in pockets, and my mind full of Wolfe's reaction when I dropped this in his lap. By 1:27, I was back at the brownstone. The lights in Wolfe's office were still burning. He had been reading, of course, his idea of midnight exercise. When I stepped in, he looked up, brows arched. "Well?" I dropped into the red leather chair. Second telegram, first corpse, Sylvia Harker, dead in Peter's penthouse, gun too neat, lipstick too perfect, and Kramer breathing fire. Wolfe's eyes closed, lids heavy. He inhaled, slow and deep. "Confound it." "That's what I said," I told him, but louder. He reached for his beer, poured a fresh glass, and sipped with grave ceremony. The fire cracked in the grate, shadows twitching across his face. "Archie," he said finally, "note, the telegrams are no longer mere instruments of extortion. They are harbingers of death. That alters everything." I nodded, pulling out the typewriter. "Consider it noted. And consider this. If telegrams keep dropping bodies, we'll need more blotter paper." Wolfe scowled, drained the glass, and reached for the bell cord. "Fritz, bring me another. And Archie, tomorrow before orchids, you will call Saul Panzer. This grows perilous." "Yes, sir," I said. The elevator creaked as Wolfe rose for bed, leaving me at the desk with the typewriter, the notes, and the echo of Sylvia's last careless remark. And as the clack of keys filled the office, I couldn't shake the thought. Telegrams were supposed to deliver news. These were delivering corpses. If you think Wolfe is a model of calm self-control, you've never been in the office when a client decides to play fast and loose with the truth. At 8:45 the next morning, Saul was in the office, flat cap in hand, smelling faintly of wet wool and cigarette smoke. Wolfe had just descended from the orchids, and the office still carried the humid tang of fertilizer clinging to his clothes. He lowered himself into the chair, rang for Fritz, and got a glass of beer with the precision of a drill sergeant. Fritz ushered her in with all the solemnity of a maitre d' at the Ritz, and Wolfe barely twitched a finger from his throne behind the desk. I was already parked in the red chair, fresh from typing up the report on Sylvia Harker's very final performance. The smell of last night's ink was still on my cuffs. Wolfe didn't even greet her. He just glared, His lips pursed like he'd bitten into an underripe persimmon. "Madam," he began, his voice thick as molasses and twice as heavy, "you have trifled with me. I will not abide it." Eloise froze, one gloved hand still on the chair back. "Mr. Wolfe, be silent." His palm hit the desk with a thud that made the blotter jump. "A woman is dead. Sylvia Harker has been found with a pistol and a telegram. This household is now enmeshed in mortal peril. And you," his voice climbed, rare for Wolfe, "you dare to withhold from me facts vital to my task. Fui." She paled, her pearls trembling at her throat. I have told you everything." "Rubbish," Wolfe thundered. "You concealed correspondence. You dissembled about your husband's death. And you have dared to make use of me as if I were some errand boy to tidy scandal. I will not. If you persist in deceit, I shall terminate this engagement forthwith. Retainer be damned." I'll say this. Eloise Barrington had ice in her veins, but even ice melts under Wolfe's glare. Her lips parted, shut, then parted again. Finally, she sagged into the chair like a ship struck broadside. "You must understand," she whispered. "It was difficult. I never wish to speak of it again." "Speak now," Wolfe snapped. "Fully, or begone." There was a long silence, broken only by the faint crackle of the fire in the grate. She stared at her gloves twisting in her lap. "Very well," she said at last. "You deserve the truth. I never loved Charles." That earned a blink even from Wolfe. My eyebrows went up too. "I loved Henry," she went on, voice quavering. "Before Charles proposed, it was Henry who courted me. But Henry had no fortune of his own. Charles was the heir. My family urged me, no, demanded me, to marry Charles. Security, influence, wealth. So I did. And Henry never forgave me." Her words hung in the air like smoke. Wolfe's nostrils flared. "Monstrous," he muttered. "You betrayed both men, one with your body, the other with your vows." Colour burned in her cheeks. It was not betrayal. It was survival. You cannot know the pressure of family expectations, of fortune at stake. Henry understood. At least I told myself he did. "And yet," Wolfe said coldly, "he inherited all when Charles fell into the sea. How convenient." Her eyes snapped up. "You think I had a hand in it?" "No, I swear it. I was not even aboard." Wolfe's hand rose, cutting her off. "I think nothing. I observe. You loved Henry, but married Charles. You profited from Charles's death through Henry's affection, if not his will. The telegrams may well be the reverberations of that sordid triangle." She shuddered, hands clutching the pearls at her throat. "Henry is dead now. All of it should have died with him." "Madam," Wolfe said, leaning forward, his eyes hard as granite, "nothing dies that is hidden. Secrets rot, they ferment, and when they burst, they poison everything they touch. You chose deceit 20 years ago, and now the consequences return." She looked stricken, but she didn't argue. I could almost pity her if I hadn't spent the night in a penthouse staring at a body with perfect lipstick and a staged gun. "Tell me," Wolfe pressed, "who else knew of your preference for Henry?" Her voice was faint. "A few. Some in society whispered. Charles suspected, perhaps, but it was never spoken aloud." "Archie," Wolfe barked. "Yes, sir." Note: Eloise Barrington loved Henry, not Charles. Married Charles for wealth. Motive established: jealousy, inheritance, and betrayal. This becomes central. I typed it, the keys clattering like hammers. Wolfe's words filled the office like cannon fire, and Eloise sat trembling under the barrage. At last Wolfe leaned back, closing his eyes. His voice softened, but only slightly. "I will not dismiss you, madam. Not yet. But hear me. If again you attempt to deceive me, I will abandon this matter instantly, and you may choke on your own lies." Her eyes filled, but she nodded. "I will not deceive again." "See that you do not," Wolfe said curtly. He reached for his glass of beer, sipped, and turned away from her as if she had already ceased to exist. The elevator groaned in the hall, carrying him up to his orchids. Eloise looked at me, eyes wet, lips trembling. "He despises me," she whispered. I shrugged. "He despises deceit. Don't take it personal. Plenty of people he despises more than you." It earned the ghost of a smile. She rose, gathered her coat, and swept out. When the door closed, I rolled a clean sheet into the typewriter and muttered, "Romance and shipping never mix. One drowns the other." And the clatter of keys filled the brownstone as I filed away Wolfe's fury into neat, typed lines. If you want Wolfe to move fast, forget it. But if you want him to move quietly, you call Saul Panzer. At 10:07 that same morning, Eloise Barrington found that out the hard way, smelling faintly of wet wool and cigarette smoke. Wolfe had just descended from the orchids, and the office still carried the humid tang of fertilizer clinging to his clothes. He lowered himself into the chair, rang for Fritz, and got a glass of beer with the precision of a drill sergeant. "Report," Wolfe said simply. Saul leaned on the edge of the red chair. The St. Albans Hotel telegram desk. Clark remembered a distinguished gentleman, grey hair, silver knob cane. But here's the catch. He handed over envelopes already addressed in another hand. The clerk copied from them. "Mr. Panzer secured one of those envelopes. It matches Mrs. Barrington's handwriting. No signature. Left cash." "Distinguished," I echoed. "That covers half the retired colonels in Manhattan. Any accent?" "None he mentioned," Saul said. But the clerk noticed something odd. The cane, he didn't lean on it, carried it like an accessory. Silver knob, old money style. Wolfe's brows climbed a millimetre. "Ah," I jotted it down. "Sounds like one of the Barrington circle, maybe a family crony, or a cousin who thinks canes are conversation starters." Saul slid a second note from his pocket. "Also check the books. Sylvia Harker's apartment. She's been getting regular deposits, quiet ones, routed through a trust at East River Bank. Guess whose name is on the trust?" I didn't need to guess. "Barrington Shipping." Saul nodded. "Account controlled by the firm. Started in 1926. Same year Charles drowned. Monthly payments. Ended last fall." "Fall," Wolfe repeated, voice like a stone dropping in water. "When Henry Barrington died." That was enough to silence the room. Even Fritz, slipping back with a tray of warm rolls, hesitated before setting it down. "So Sylvia was telling the truth," I said. "They paid her off for 20 years. Wolfe's eyes snapped open. "Phooey, not the truth, a truth. The payments prove only that someone wished her silence. Whether it was hush money or charity is still ambiguous." "Charity with that many zeros?" I asked. "Men have paid more for less deserving creatures," Wolfe growled. Saul shifted his cap in his hands. "The trail ends clean. Whoever arranged it knew their bookkeeping. No leaks." "Except the clerk with a memory for canes," I said. "Indeed," Wolfe said, swallowing half his beer. "Archie? Note. Telegram sender, grey hair, cane, silver knob. Likely elder ally of Barrington family. Sylvia Harker payments. Terminated on Henry's death. Correlation suggestive." I rattled it into the typewriter, the clack echoing. Wolfe turned back to Saul. "Continue discreet observation of the hotel. The gentleman may return. Do not be seen. If he does, secure his identity." "Understood." Saul rose. "I'll keep the clerk sweet." Wolfe waved him off like a Roman emperor dismissing a legionnaire. When the door closed, Wolfe exhaled through his nose. "Well, Archie?" "Well," I said, "we've got a ghost with a cane and a dead actress with perfect lipstick. If we add a monocle and a top hat, we'll have the whole board game set." His glare could have cut steel. "This is no jest. The money trail alters everything. It confirms collusion reaching through decades. It confirms that Charles Barrington's death was never closed. It confirms—" The bell rang at 10:52, sharp as a pistol shot. I went to the door. A delivery boy stood there, hat low, breath fogging in the cold. He shoved an envelope at me and vanished before I could ask who paid him. I brought it in. Wolfe slit it with his thumb, read and hissed softly. Another telegram. I leaned over his shoulder. The words were short, vicious. "Stop digging or drown again." "That's poetic," I said, though the rhythm's off. Wolfe folded it neatly. Note: the campaign escalates. The writer fears exposure. I typed it in, watching his fingers drum against the blotter. "Archie," he said finally, "prepare memoranda for Mr. Cohen at the Gazette. If the police grow obstinate, we may require the press. I will not tolerate this cowardice in shadows." I whistled low. "Kramer'll love that." "Kramer," Wolfe snapped, "may hang himself with his cigar. We have work." The office settled into silence again, the fire popping, the typewriter keys clacking, and Wolfe glowering into his glass. Outside, the snow kept falling, blanketing the city like a stage curtain. But inside, we had our next act set: an old cane, a stop to count, and a new telegram promising that corpses were only the opening notes. If you've never been inside the Empire Club on Madison, picture a cathedral where the gods are steak, cigars, and whispers. The carpets swallow your shoes, the portraits glare down at you as if you've just insulted their ancestors, and the waiters float like they're auditioning for sainthood. At 6:12 that evening, I walked through the brass doors and told the man at the desk I was looking for Peter Barrington. Peter wasn't hard to find. He was slumped in a leather armchair by the fire, a glass of something amber trembling in his hand. He looked less like the Prince of Shipping Fortunes and more like a boy caught cheating on exams. When he saw me, he flinched as if I'd brought the cops in behind me. "Goodwin," he muttered, "this isn't the place." "It's exactly the place," I said, sliding into the chair opposite. "You want to keep your society credentials? We'll play this game under your club's chandelier. Order another drink, you're going to need it." He gestured weakly to the waiter, who brought a refill with more sympathy than Peter deserved. I let him take a swallow before leaning forward. "Here's the setup," I said. "Sylvia Harker's dead, a telegram in her hand, a revolver at her side. It's too neat, and you know it. Somebody's staging bodies like tableaus, and you're next on the invitation list unless you talk." His eyes darted around the room. Men in dark suits murmured in corners, the clink of ice in highballs filling the silences. He lowered his voice. "You think I don't know that? You think I sleep?" "From the look of you, not recently. So spill it. What's the family skeleton Henry Barrington's closet never aired?" He stared into his glass, swirling the amber liquid like it might whisper an answer. Finally, his voice came raw. "My father told me, years ago, after too much brandy. He suspected, he believed, Henry killed Charles. That jolted me, though I kept my face smooth. Your father suspected his own brother of murder and kept it in the family vault." Peter nodded miserably. "He swore me to silence, said it would ruin everything, our name, the company, society. He said as long as Henry lived it could never be spoken, and now—" His hand shook so badly the drink sloshed. "Now Henry's dead, and it's all coming back." I leaned in, voice low. "So the great Barrington dynasty is built on a storm-tossed murder and a pact of silence. That about cover it?" He winced. "Don't say it like that. You don't understand. The firm, our power, it all depended on keeping it buried. My father said Charles was reckless, unfit. Henry was the one who could lead, so he let it be." "That's not letting it be," I said. "That's covering up fratricide." His face crumpled. "I know. God help me, I know, but what could I do? I was a boy when he told me, and now the telegrams, the threats, I can't hold it together." I studied him, the firelight painting shadows under his eyes. He wasn't lying, he was unraveling. Whether from guilt, fear, or too many cocktails, I couldn't yet say. "All right," I said. "Here's how it stands. You've got Wolfe on your side, though you don't deserve him. He doesn't like lies. If you've got more tucked away, cough it now before he decides you're ornamental." Peter shook his head violently. "That's all. That's everything." "Funny," I said, standing. "Everyone always says that, and somehow the story keeps growing legs." The waiter swept in to clear the glasses, and I left Peter hunched in the chair like a man who'd heard his own eulogy. By 7:02 I was back at the brownstone, the office lamps glowing. Wolfe was behind his desk, a fresh beer waiting. He looked up as I came in. "Well?" I tossed my hat onto the couch. "The nephew broke. At the Empire Club, no less. Turns out Daddy Barrington suspected Henry all along. Suspected and kept his mouth shut. Swore Peter to silence too. So the rot was in the family tree from the start." Wolfe's brows rose. "Ah, the midpoint." "Midpoint?" I echoed. "The fulcrum of the case," Wolfe intoned. "A living death, an old guilt. The revelation that even Henry's own brother believed him a murderer. That is the pivot. Now the pattern will reverse. The guilty will flail, the innocent will suffer, and the truth will struggle upward." He closed his eyes, fingers steepled. I rolled a fresh sheet into the typewriter, the clatter beginning. You're telling me, I said. We've hit the halfway mark and already have 1 corpse, 2 telegrams, and enough Barrington dirt to fill a freighter. What's the second half look like, sir? Or do I not want to know? Wolfe opened his eyes and reached for his beer. Archie, the second half looks like blood. Be alert. That was his ritual closure. He drank, I typed, and the brownstone office settled into silence, the fire hissing softly, while outside Manhattan kept its secrets for another night. The morning edition is supposed to carry breakfast news, politics, baseball scores, and the occasional scandal to go with your coffee. It isn't supposed to feature the headline "Retired Lawyer Slain, Office Ransacked." But at 8:35 that morning, Lon Cohen's name was on the phone line, and his voice was tight enough to make me put down my glass of milk. "Archie," he said, "you tell Wolfe, Henry Barrington's old attorney, a guy named Amos Lawton, was found dead this morning. Somebody cracked his skull in his office, left the safe open. The place looks like a hurricane came through. Word is files are missing. Files going back to the 20s. You connect the dots." I whistled low. "Thanks, Lon. You just ruined my breakfast." By 9:10, I was at Lawton's office downtown, the kind of panelled mausoleum where lawyers bury the living in paperwork. Cops milled in the corridors, reporters sniffed around like terriers, and the stink of blood hadn't yet faded under the cigars. Kramer was there, red-faced, barking orders, with Pearlie Stebbins hulking at his side. When he spotted me, he looked ready to combust. "Goodwin, if Wolfe sent you—" "He did," I said smoothly, showing him my grin. "To observe. Strictly scenic." "Scenic, my eye. You vultures can't keep your beaks out. First Sylvia, now Lawton. 2 bodies in a week and both tie back to Wolfe's meddling. I ought to run you in for obstruction." "You'd have to catch me first," I said. Kramer's face darkened to beet red, but before he could erupt, I moved past him into the inner office. The scene was classic. Desk overturned, drawers yanked, paper littering the floor. The safe stood open, its door hanging like a jaw knocked out of place, and in the corner, under a blanket, the shape of a man who'd once known too many secrets. Pearlie grunted. "Blunt force, back of the head, safe stripped. Whoever did it knew what they wanted." "Which was?" I asked. "Files," he said, "old ones. Barrington shipping contracts, trust papers, all gone." I crouched near the wreckage. Among the strewn papers was a letterhead dated 1925. SS Halcyon, passenger list, torn in half, as if someone had ripped it out in a hurry. "Souvenir hunters?" I asked. Kramer stomped up. "Don't get cute. This was no burglary. This was a hit, and the trigger was pulled because Wolfe stirred up ghosts. Somebody's looking for proof, and somebody's killing for it." He jabbed his cigar at me, ash scattering on the carpet. "You tell your boss he's on borrowed time. If he doesn't quit, I'll make sure the DA has him in front of a grand jury so fast his orchids will wilt." I shrugged. "If you want to tell him yourself, Inspector, you know where the brownstone is. But I warn you, Fritz's coffee is stronger than your cigars. Might kill you quicker." He swore under his breath, but I was already heading for the door. By 10:47 I was back in the office just before Wolfe disappeared upstairs for orchid duty. He was at his desk, the Gazette open beside his beer glass, and when I gave him the rundown his nostrils flared. "Lawton," he said. "Yes, Henry Barrington's solicitor of record, custodian of his private dealings, and now dead, his safe violated." "Which means," I offered, "the blackmailer's digging for a shovel big enough to bury us all." "Phooey," Wolfe snapped. "Not us. The Barringtons. Someone believes Lawton held documentary proof of Charles's murder, or its concealment. That proof is now stolen. That alters the balance entirely." I sat, typing as he dictated. Note: Amos Lawton, murdered. Safe rifled. Files gone. Specifically Barrington records. Proof once existed. Now in unknown hands. The keys clacked, filling the office with a sound like muffled gunfire. Wolfe leaned back, eyes closed, his face a thundercloud. At 11:02 the bell shrilled. I opened the door and in stormed Kramer, dripping sleet and fury. He smelled of cold tobacco and fury, and he slammed his hat on the table hard enough to knock over the milk Fritz had left for me. "Wolfe," he bellowed, "this stops now. I've got 2 dead and a city editor breathing down my neck. You're in it up to your chins, and I won't have it." Wolfe didn't move. He let the silence stretch until Kramer's breath rasped. Finally he said, "Inspector, You are an irritant. Nothing more. If you wish to bellow, do so outside. If you wish enlightenment, sit." "I'll stand," Kramer snapped. "Then sway," Wolfe said, sipping beer. Kramer's fist hit the desk. "You're hiding something. You knew about Lawton before I did. Somebody's feeding you inside dirt." Wolfe's eyes opened, sharp as knives. "Not feeding, Inspector. Retaining. Mrs. Barrington engaged me. I am bound. If you dislike that, complain to her." "She's society's darling," Kramer growled. "Hands off, Wolfe. If she falls, the whole department will pay the price." "Then you should be grateful," Wolfe said coldly, "for I intend to shield her by exposing the true culprit, Archie." "Yes, sir," I said, notebook ready. "Summon all principals to this office tomorrow evening. Mrs. Barrington, Peter Barrington, the company's executives, anyone touched by this sordid business. I will have them here under this roof." Kramer barked a laugh. "You think I'll let you stage one of your little drawing-room theatricals over my dead body?" "Possibly," Wolfe murmured, "but not before dinner." Kramer swore again, grabbed his hat and stormed out, the door slamming hard enough to rattle the orchids upstairs. Wolfe closed his eyes, drained his beer, and reached for the bell cord. "Fritz, bring the cheese tray." I leaned back, grinning. "So we're setting the trap, just like old times." He didn't answer, but his silence was the kind you could hear, grim, certain, inevitable. The brownstone had become the courtroom, and Wolfe was sharpening the gavel. If you think Wolfe likes visitors, you've never tried to schedule 6 of them on the same night under his roof. At 6:45 sharp, I was juggling telephones like a circus clown. One call to Eloise Barrington, one to Peter, one to a pair of shipping associates who looked like they were born in boardrooms, and one to Inspector Kramer, who barked his consent like I'd just suggested he join me in a barroom brawl. Saul Panzer got the nod without fuss. When Wolfe calls, Saul listens. By 7:55, the brownstone was humming like a drum before battle. Fritz was in the dining room, fussing with silverware that gleamed brighter than the moon, his duck consommé simmering with quiet dignity. Wolfe had decreed that dinner must precede the Inquisition, and when Wolfe decrees, even the Furies step aside. At 8 o'clock on the nose, Eloise Barrington arrived, her sable tighter around her shoulders, her eyes darting like she expected a firing squad. Peter followed minutes later, hair slicked, expression already sliding toward panic. The 2 Barrington associates, Porterfield, a pinched man with spectacles, and Green, a barrel with suspenders, arrived in tandem, talking too loudly about shipping lanes. Kramer stomped in at 8:17 with Pearlie Stebbins at his elbow, grumbling that he'd rather be at Centre Street wrangling bookies. Wolfe took them all in with the serenity of a judge in his robes. He was planted at the head of the dining table, napkin folded across his belly, lips pursed as Fritz began serving. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, voice like velvet on steel, "you will dine. Afterward, we shall deliberate." No one argued, not even Kramer. Dinner proceeded under the heavy silence of people who'd rather be anywhere else. Fritz's consommé was flawless, the duck tender, the wine impeccable, but every swallow went down like lead. Eloise barely touched her plate. Peter drank too much. Porterfield kept polishing his spectacles until I wanted to grab them and fling them into the fire. Wolfe naturally ate with relish. He took his time, sipped his burgundy, and wiped his lips with serene patience. At exactly 8:52, he set his knife down with the finality of a gavel. "Archie," he said, "escort them to the office." The migration was slow, reluctant, like cattle sensing the slaughterhouse. The office lamps were lit, the fire alive. Wolfe's chair behind the desk already waiting like a throne. The room smelled of tobacco and tension. I closed the doors and the trial began. Wolfe leaned back, eyes hooded. "We have assembled the interested parties. 2 are dead, 1 blackmailer walks, and a family secret festers. We shall have truth." Kramer grunted. "Cut the theatrics, Wolfe. If you've got something, spit it out." "Patience, Inspector. Truth ripens slowly. We must savour its bouquet." I hid a grin. Wolfe was in his element now, the brownstone transformed into his personal courtroom. Saul Panzer stood discreetly in a corner, eyes sharp under his cap, silent but steady as a rifleman. Eloise twisted her pearls until they squeaked. Peter fidgeted like a schoolboy awaiting the strap. First, Wolfe said, Mrs. Barrington, you concealed your true affections, your love for Henry, not Charles. That deception birthed jealousies and motives that still echo. Eloise gasped softly. Kramer's eyes flicked to me, and I nodded. Wolfe had ripped that curtain open days ago. Second, Wolfe continued, Mr. Peter Barrington, your father confided in you that he suspected Henry killed Charles. That suspicion poisoned your silence. Peter's face drained. He muttered, I never... Silence, Wolfe commanded. Third, Sylvia Harker, hushed for decades by payments from Barrington accounts, broke her silence only to die, her death staged, her silence permanent. The fire popped in the grate. Porterfield coughed, Green shifted, and Kramer muttered a curse. Fourth, Wolfe said, voice now sharp as a whip, Amos Lawton, Henry's solicitor, is murdered. His files stolen. Proof once existed, now missing. He paused, letting the weight of it settle. The pattern is clear. A hand moves through these shadows, eliminating, silencing, destroying evidence. And tonight, his eyes opened, gleaming, we will force it into light. He turned his head, and his eyes met mine. A signal. It's time. I straightened in my chair, fingers brushing the typewriter keys already waiting on the desk. The summons had been issued. The tribunal was in session. The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Even Kramer didn't speak. Wolfe lifted his glass of beer, sipped and set it down. The stage, he murmured, is set. The brownstone office had hosted its share of fireworks, but that night it felt like a courtroom where the verdict was going to change the weather over Manhattan. The fire burned steady in the grate, but the air was brittle with expectation. Wolfe sat behind his desk, planted like a mountain in his chair, a glass of beer within reach. Facing him in a semicircle were the principals of the affair, Eloise Barrington, pale under her sable, Peter Barrington, jittering like a college boy after finals, the two associates Porterfield and Green as stiff as boards, Inspector Kramer, rumbling with suppressed fury, Pearlie Stebbins, arms crossed like a bulldog, and Saul Panzer, silent in his corner, eyes sharp. I was at my usual post, typewriter rolled with clean paper, ready to record Wolfe's aria of logic. And an aria it was, because Wolfe had donned the robe of judge, prosecutor, and executioner all at once. He began without preamble. We are here because 3 lives have been lost or blighted by secrets buried 2 decades past. Charles Barrington died aboard the SS Halcyon. His death was ruled accident, yet whispers persisted, and now they have resurfaced in telegrams and corpses. Tonight, we end it. He paused, eyes sweeping the room, daring interruption. Even Kramer held his tongue. The telegrams, Wolfe went on, arrived first to Mrs. Eloise Barrington, then a duplicate placed in Sylvia Harker's dead hand. Their wording identical, the truth will be revealed, a declaration not a demand, yet Mrs. Barrington interpreted them as extortion. Eloise stirred. They... Silence, Wolfe thundered. You will not prattle until I permit it. She sank back, lips trembling. Next, Wolfe said, Sylvia Harker, who claimed she witnessed Henry Barrington shove Charles to his death. But her memory was eroded by gin, and for decades she was sustained by monthly payments. These ceased with Henry's death. The implication is that her silence was purchased, yet she lied in excess, exaggerating her role, exaggerating her view. Her testimony cannot anchor truth. Peter shifted, sweat glistening at his temple. Wolfe's gaze skewered him. Peter Barrington admitted that his father suspected Henry of murder, but chose silence for the family's sake. Thus the rot of concealment infected the dynasty. That cowardice emboldened suspicion, and suspicion bred threat. Peter mumbled, I never meant. Wolfe cut him off with a glare. You meant nothing. You allowed everything. That distinction is crucial. He splayed his fingers on the blotter. Finally, Amos Lawton, Henry's solicitor. Murdered, his safe rifled, files gone. Those files contained evidence not of Charles's murder, but of Eloise Barrington's affair with Henry, evidence that predated Charles's death. The room gasped collectively, like a stage audience at the twist. Eloise clutched her pearls until they snapped, beads scattering across the carpet. That is slander, she cried. It is fact, Wolfe said coldly. The missing files prove that your liaison with Henry began before Charles died. That is why you dreaded exposure. That is why you interpreted anonymous telegrams as blackmail. And that," he leaned forward, voice dropping like a hammer, "is because you yourself composed them." The silence that followed was seismic. Even the fire seemed to hold its crackle. Eloise shook her head violently. "No, I—" "Yes," Wolfe said, "your vanity betrayed you. You believed sending a proxy, the grey-haired gentleman with the cane, would shield you, but you betrayed yourself. The envelopes he carried bore your own hand. The loops of your B and the flourish of your R are identical to your correspondence. You are the author, devising the notes to divert suspicion, to stir confusion. But in so doing, you resurrected all the old ghosts, and men more ruthless seized the opportunity. Sylvia's death, Lawton's death, those were consequences of your folly." Kramer barked. "You're saying she started this whole mess herself?" Wolfe's lip curled. "I am not saying, I am demonstrating." He gestured to Saul. "Mr. Pantzer obtained samples of Mrs. Barrington's correspondence, her invitations, her letters. The loops of her B, the flourish of her R, they are present on the telegram envelopes. She betrayed herself with her own hand." Saul, silent as always, produced a folder. I passed it to Kramer, who scanned the sheets, his cigar drooping. His jaw tightened as the comparison leapt out. The elegant but nervous script, the telltale curves. "Damn it," he muttered. "It matches." Eloise crumpled, folding into herself. "I only wanted to protect Henry's memory, to protect myself. When I saw that first note unsigned, I thought, someone knew. Someone would ruin me. I panicked. I thought if I made it look like an outside threat, I could control it." "Phooey," Wolfe roared. "You cannot control chaos once loosed. You breathed life into suspicion, and it devoured you. Your vanity, your deceit, they made you the author of ruin." Peter covered his face with his hands. Porterfield whispered something to Green. The room was heavy with shame, with judgment. Kramer stepped forward, jaw set. "That's enough. Mrs. Barrington, you're coming with me. You've got a lot to answer for." Eloise looked up, eyes wet, face pale as marble. "I never killed anyone. You must believe that." "Maybe you didn't pull the trigger," Kramer said gruffly. "But you lit the fuse." He nodded to Pearlie, who moved to take her arm. She resisted weakly, then sagged, pearls scattering from her lap. They led her out, the door closing behind like a cell door. The silence that followed was broken only by the crack of the fire. Wolfe leaned back, eyes closed, chest rising with the weight of his exertion. Finally, he spoke. "Archie, record. The author of the telegrams is exposed, but the murders of Sylvia Harker and Amos Lawton remain unresolved. This affair is not concluded." I rolled the last sheet from the typewriter, stacked it neatly, and leaned back with a sigh. "Well, sir, you've done it again. Though I can't help thinking all this fuss over telegrams feels a little old-fashioned. Maybe next time the killer will try Western Union by carrier pigeon." Wolfe opened his eyes long enough to glare at me. "Archie." "Yes, sir?" "Fetch Fritz, and another beer." That was his ritual closure. The gavel had fallen, the tribunal dispersed, and the brownstone exhaled its final breath of tension. Outside, Manhattan's neon still flickered, but in the office the verdict was written: past sins never stay buried.